Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PPW podcast, bringing you news, views, and interviews from the real estate marketplace and PropTech industry every week. You can find us on YouTube, on iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And if you find us on those platforms, please like us, follow us, rate us. And thank you to everybody who's already got in touch with feedback from the first episode. We appreciate all of it. For our second episode today, I'm joined again by Harvey Hancock, who is one of our writers. Hello, Harvey.
Good afternoon, Ed. Great to be back.
And by Simon Baker, the chairman of online marketplaces, and relevant for this episode, the former CEO of the Australian portal group, REA Group. Simon, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. It's good to see you two again.
So from the first episode, one topic that we didn't have time to get into was real estate portals and how you can transfer them, or maybe not quite transfer them, over a border. It's something that seems simple, but something that, as we're probably going to find out, isn't really that simple in reality. Now, it's a topic that's kind of reared its head a little bit over the last few months, what with CoStar coming into Europe, or specifically coming into the UK. And well, there's no one better to talk about it really than Simon, who was in charge of REA Group when REA Group launched quite a big initiative to establish itself in Europe. Simon, could you start off by giving us maybe a potted history of, firstly, some of the background of REA Group, and then why you wanted to get into Europe and what happened?
Okay, but perhaps a bit of the background of the REA Group is a separate podcast into itself, which we should do in the future. But let's talk about growth. So I was running the REA Group from 2001 through 2008, and that was a period of enormous growth. We went from being maybe 12 to 15% of Australian real estate agents using the platform to, up around the 80% plus 90% mark. And in around 2005, we started to think about, well, what's next? If you're the market leader within one country, where do you grow? You either go deeper in that market, you either extract more value from your existing customers through pricing, or you maybe move up and down the value chain, get into software, etc., or you take the model that you understand very well and expand overseas. We did all three, as it turns out, and we can talk about the first two at another time. And when we thought about expansion and growth, we started to look around the world to see where were markets that were similar to ours. And you quickly put a line through the United States because it's actually a very challenging market. It's an MLS environment, and what you're doing in one market doesn't quickly transfer to that market. But then we started to look into the United Kingdom, which was very similar, same language, same sole agency. So there's one agent representing a property for a period of time. There's a very clear defined how the market works. And in those days, there was Rightmove, and then there were about 5 or 6 other players. There was Finder Property, Property Finder, and a bunch of others. We ended up acquiring Property Finder. We did it as a joint venture with News Corp or News International, it's called, in the United Kingdom. So with the guys there. I think we had, it was either 70-30 or 50-50. I can't remember which one it was now that we did it. Actually, no, it was 50-50. So we created a joint venture vehicle and acquired Property Finder. And that's where the fun and games started. We then went on to acquire the number one in Italy, which in those days was Casa, which we did as another joint venture with Sky Italia, which is also another News Corp vehicle. We own 70%, they own 30%. We acquired the At Home Group in Luxembourg, or the greater Luxembourg region. So it's not just Luxembourg itself, it's Luxembourg, and then you basically draw a line around Luxembourg. People laugh, so that's very small. Yes, but it was actually very profitable. So, you don't have to be massive to be attractive. We went on to buy 51% of Property Finder in the UAE. We did an investment of something, I can't remember what it was now, in Hong Kong, and we did something in New Zealand. No, we started a website in New Zealand. So we had, cross-border, lots of experiences of what works and what doesn't work in that process.
Okay, well, I mean, let's get into what works and what doesn't work. So Harvey and I, before the show started today, we've been looking at a few examples of successes and failures, and like, quite honestly, it's quite difficult to find both. It seems like there's not too many good examples or too many transparent examples of real estate portals jumping over a border. One that you've been looking at, Harvey, Idealista. Give us a bit of a background about who Idealista are and what borders they jumped and to what effect.
Yeah, sure. Idealista, for idiots. Founded 2000 by two brothers, and it is now the market leader in Spain, in Portugal, and is in a very close fight for the number one spot in Italy. Very big company. It got sold by Apex Partners for 1.3 billion in 2015, 2016, something around that. It's a little bit of a no-frills portal in some senses. It's not been, loads and loads of mergers and acquisitions and loads of data and tech integrations. It's a very solid business model and very popular, specifically in Spain and Portugal, where it's a clear market leader. I don't think they've ventured any further yet. I'm not sure if they plan on doing so, but they've definitely found a nice niche in the Iberian Peninsula, and they're fighting for the number one spot with Immobiliaris in Italy.
So we were just talking before we actually started recording here about Idealista, and specifically about Idealista in Italy. And as you said there, Harvey, it's kind of debatable who's number one in Italy, because Idealista doesn't just own its eponymous portal Idealista. It also owns Casa, which is or was the number 3 player. So it's a bit ambiguous who the number one is. But Simon, you were saying, what have they done there? They've bought up the number 3 player, and that's how they've done it. They've not necessarily transferred the grain of success that they had in Spain across a border they've bought. Could you expand on that a little bit? What were you saying just before we recorded?
Sure. So let's go back. I mean, in 2006, maybe, I can't remember what it is now. I remember buying Casa, which was the then number one property portal in Italy, from a guy called Antonio Fragnan. And it was based in a small town called Treviso, which is north of Venice. I remember trotting out there with a couple of the guys from Australia, actually, to review the business, and we ended up buying it for about 7 million euros, maybe 10 million euros. It wasn't a lot of money in those days, and certainly not in the scheme of what these businesses are worth today. And in those days, it was the market leader. And the number 2 player was Immobiliare, okay, which was being run out of Rome, if I remember correctly. And that sort of was the market structure then, and there's a very good story about what happened subsequently over time. And after I left REA, and this is just after I've left, it's got nothing to do with it, the leadership changed, where Immobiliare overtook Casa, and then clearly Casa just slipped down the leaderboard, just purely for a number of reasons. And then when you sort of unpack what happened in it, and I think this is where the lessons around cross-border management are important. When you think about going cross-border, you have sort of 3 choices. One is your either business is born cross-border, and in a future podcast episode, it might be the one after this, we'll be talking to Mark from Snow Only, who has a born cross-border business, right? He doesn't care about the geography, he cares about the snow. Okay, so we'll talk to him. That's a born cross-border business, but most portals are actually geographic by nature. Okay, the second is that you take your model and you just put it into another country, and you start and you build and you execute well. Now, there are lots of examples of that. The Matula Group is a good one, which I was chairman of for a long time, and we can talk about how we took exactly the same model. It was a photocopy
I know. I sat just opposite the girls who were in charge of copying and pasting portals.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it worked all right.
yeah, it worked all right. But you were taking an absolutely identical model into another market, and apart from language, there were not really a lot of changes. The third is way of doing it, and then the third is that you acquire a business that's operating already in a market. Where people tend to go wrong in the last two areas. One is they take their current business model, shove it into another market, and expect that market to operate the same way. And what happens with that is that you rapidly find out that properties are bought and sold differently. The market has a different relationship to your brand and to your portal. You have to build market presence, maybe a different name for that in that portal, for that portal in that market. You clearly need a different team on the ground selling, because it's very hard to have salespeople operating across border because of, once again, cultural differences, language differences, and so on. So it's actually very complex to start from a zero base unless you're powering it with locals to do it. But then the question is, are they part of your DNA of where you've been successful or not? So then the other way that people tend to do it, which is through acquisition. When you think about it, the Idealista guys have acquired, they started in Italy, then they acquired Casa, which then launched them up to be basically equal number one in the market. You can see how Zoopla started, right? They started in the United Kingdom, but then they just hoovered up everyone else in the market. Property Finder, Finder Property, Prime Location, and a bunch of others. I think on the Street or something was another one. I don't know, it's too long ago now to remember them all. But they hoovered up existing players to create a number two player. Or you buy.
I want to jump in there because that's quite an interesting. We've got an interesting example of the differing fortunes, let's say, of just copying and pasting your business model over a border and buying something that already exists. So I think a good example of, a company that has done both and seen differing fortunes is Property Guru. Property Guru is, they're based out of Singapore. They started in Singapore, and I think it took them a few years. So I think they started in Singapore in 2007, took them until 2011 to jump over the border into Malaysia. And then they kind of got a taste for it and they moved to some other places. So I think they acquired a portal in Indonesia in 2014.
Yep.
They acquired one in Vietnam in 2018. And then they acquired iProperty and the REA Group's assets in Malaysia in 2021. Now, what's interesting is the differing fortunes they've had in these countries, right? So you would think that Singapore to Malaysia, I mean, it's literally like a mile across the water. It would go swimmingly, right? And it kind of did. They were in a battle for number one there in Malaysia for many years, but they weren't like the clear outright leaders straight from the off. Because I remember iProperty and Property Guru hated each other. They would always send me rival press releases saying we're number one, no, we're number one, and I'd have to delete and retract what I'd said about them all the time. But then they went to Indonesia, and they went to Indonesia, I think, as I understand, quite early. And you think, okay, well, maybe that's going to translate into being the number one, and it didn't quite work out for them. They were never really number one, and actually last year they pulled out of Indonesia, which I found quite interesting because you'd think Indonesia is a big market, potentially a lot of upside, but they pulled out of it. Whereas in Vietnam they are number one, so it really, there doesn't seem to be a clear pattern to any of it.
Yeah. So
do you mind if I jump in there, guys?
Yeah.
Just with a question for Simon here, because I mean, based on what we've said so far, everything sounds pretty much like it's a coin flip on whether it's going to be successful or not. That sounds pretty much what's going on. Maybe slightly more towards tails than heads. Are there any commonalities across all these businesses that have tried to expand internationally, Simon, where you say these all made the same mistake, or they all failed to grasp the same key proposition that they needed to fulfill in order to succeed in those new markets?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a coin flip, because I don't think it's chance in what happens here. A couple of things. One is that we should have a different podcast on iProperty, because I was chairman and I can tell you some great stories.
We've got, honestly, I've got a spreadsheet of podcast ideas. It's already too long, but
Yes.
got
Anyway,
plenty of time.
we can talk about that battle between the iProperty and Property Guru another day. And Harvey, in terms of coin flips, no, it's not so much a coin flip as if I'm going into a new market, and timing is everything. So if you roll the clock back 15 years, 20 years, okay, you're going into a new market, but you're where marketplaces, real estate marketplaces, are relatively new, so you can establish a position. But in today's market, they're everywhere. People understand them. They understand how they operate. The rules of the game are written. To start from scratch in any market requires a massive investment to build a brand, build a team, build content, build relationship with the content providers, and so on. And it is very, very hard, very time consuming, and incredibly costly. So I think there's not really a big coin flip there. It's just you need to have a honking big brown paper bag of money that you can then throw at the problem and hope like some of it sticks. Okay,
I mean,
the second way to think about it is then, okay, I'll buy an asset that exists, right? Which is really what CoStar's done. It's what a lot of these other players have done. Aviva's done it by bringing together strong players around various markets and so on. And what the real balancing act in all of this is, how do you take a existing player that has its own culture, its own way of operating, and assimilate it into a broader organization? Now, let's go back to Casa and where things went wrong. Okay, and this is a great story, right? And probably one where if we'll spend 5 minutes on it, but I think we'll learn a lot of lessons. So Casa was the market leader. There was a guy called Antonio Freñan who was running it. He left the business once he got his check and went off and did something. 11.2 million. Now I remember the number, 11.2 million in cash we paid, euros. And then we brought in a couple of CEOs along the way. We said, well, we are based in Australia. We have operations in the United Kingdom, and we need to have someone who can run the Italian business. So, and none of us speak Italian, which is always a bad point to start with. Okay, if you're operating in a country with other languages. So we better find a local that we trust. And we took someone out of Sky Italia. So it had that News Corp feeling to it. So it was someone that was trusted and could run. Now, a couple of things. One, you've got to give them a degree of autonomy. They've got to work within a broader plan, because you want to grow the business rapidly. You're going to invest in that growth. You want to provide them with knowledge and technology to help expand. The problem is they're already doing stuff their own way. They have their own platform, and to rewrite a portal platform is a long process. It's hard, and there were nuances. So the Italian market, it's not sole exclusivity in a property, which means any agent can sell the property. When they put properties on a map, they don't put the exact address, they put an approximate address. Otherwise, people steal the property. A lot of the properties are off-market transactions, because it's people within a village selling to each other, because it's a very different type of even geographic landscape in that process, and so on. And then how you market to Italians is different again from a consumer marketing perspective. So all these things we thought we knew, we actually didn't know when we went to the market. Now, where things started to go wrong was when we tried to take a business that really was Italian in nature, try to corporatize it and drive it aggressively to targets that we were being set in Melbourne in Australia. Right now, it's just a recipe for failure in that case. What happens in that process, and I had left after that, and there was a fantastic property portal watch conference in I don't remember where it was now, somewhere in Europe, I think maybe in Amsterdam, where um, one of the presenters from, let's say, another Italian portal happily showed us how the numbers for Casa were being creatively made up through pop unders, where someone went to one website and suddenly Casa would pop under, and no one knew it was open, but that was another visit. Okay. Now, when you saw that happening, then and the question was, well, why was that happening? Well,
I bet you were glad you'd left by the time you saw that, eh?
I was, because that would have the shit hit the fan, to put it bluntly, right? And what was really happening there was that the company had become corporatized. What should have been an entrepreneurial vehicle, rapid growth, focus on going forward, capturing more and more people in the Italian market, compete aggressively with Immobiliare, became one that was focused on, right, what are the personal targets I, as the CEO, have to hit for the Italian business so I get my bonus, because I have no equity in the business. And one of the targets was a unique visitor target. So guess what? He got to the target. Now, in an Australian culture, it just wouldn't cross your mind to do that. Okay? But this is what the guy did. Now, what happens in all that process is that there's a clash of culture, there's a clash of objectives, there's a corporatization coming in from somewhere else. And then the person running it, instead of looking at local shareholders and going, okay, what do the local shareholders need? How am I going to deliver that? Let's go. I've now got a corporate objective. I've got people coming over on plane trips who want to basically visit Italy, right? Okay, to say, hey, I think you should do your marketing this way. And then they're going, well, should I do it that way? But it's not going to work for this market. And you get this sort of tension. Okay, so unless you're the person at the top who's highly conscious of this and realize this tension that creates, it doesn't work. But there's another example of this occurring where you get this suffocation from corporatization, is in Property Finder in Dubai. I don't know if you guys know the story, but this is a great story.
I think I might know where this is going, but go on.
Back in 2006, because Dubai has these loops, right? It goes up and massively, then it's a bubble burst and it goes down, it goes up and goes down, right? We being REA in those days bought 51% of Property Finder in Dubai for, I don't remember now, a few million, as a cash injection into the business, from the local CEO, who happens to be still the CEO, a guy called Michael Legnani. Super good operator, super smart operator. Swiss guy, knows the market, has been there for 20 years now, probably longer. We knew that part of the world we wanted to have a presence. It wasn't costing a lot. And when I was there, it was like, okay, Michael, we own 51%. We'll give you whatever you need. We'll get out of the way, because we were learning lessons in the other markets. We can talk about what went wrong within the United Kingdom as well. What happened subsequently is that this corporate pressure came again to tell him how to run his business, what he had to do, and it all exploded at some point. And this is now a fair time ago, so I can probably talk about it, where there was a lot of exertion in trying to kick him out, and basically, but not understand. But that was done from, once again, a perspective around how companies operated from a Australian perspective, rather than from a perspective about understanding how Middle East or Dubai companies were operating. They couldn't just kick him out, and he ended up buying back the business for cents in the dollar. He bought back his share for cents in the dollar. It's now $1 billion business, and he's grown it.
Okay, so these are good war stories, by the way. I'm sure more of them will come out on future episodes, so I don't want to push you for two more. I don't want to use up all your war stories on one episode.
I got 1,000.
So let's say you are. I mean, this is a complete hypothetical here, but you're giving advice to Andy Florence, even though he's been in the business for 30 years or whatever. You're giving Andy Florence advice about moving over a border, moving to a different market, trying to operate or just guide on the market? What are your 3 bullet points of, listen, mate, this is what you ought to be doing to make a success of this business in a market that you don't necessarily understand?
Yep. 3. 1 would be, don't assume that everything you know about how something operates is relevant to the market you've gone to, because it probably isn't. It's probably actually operates very differently. And we know that's the case because an MLS-driven market in the United States is very different to operating with 6% commissions is very different to the United Kingdom, which is a one-sided transaction market operating at 1% commission with a honking great big market leader, a number 2 player who's large. Okay. Second is make sure you got a good local team who understands these challenges in the market. 3, think differently, but differently within the context of what makes sense in the United Kingdom. Don't just think differently for the sake of thinking differently, but how am I going to really take on the market leader? And throwing 40 odd million pounds at marketing is not the answer, right? That's just 40. It's like that 16-year-old darts player, right? Just you're very good at throwing darts at a dartboard, but you're just throwing darts at a dartboard, right?
But he was almost a world champion.
Yeah, almost, right?
A glorious runner-up.
Okay, a glorious runner-up. But the whole point is that you get a whole bunch of darts, you throw them at a dartboard, you hope like something hits. That's what it feels like when you're spending that much money on marketing.
Okay, what about this is probably another topic for another time, but I want to touch on it really quickly. Would you bother if you were trying to build this empire of portals around the world, would you bother trying to put them on the same tech stack? No. Because we've heard, there's...
Do you want the long answer or the short answer?
Yeah.
No.
Well, REA Group came to probably Portal Watch, and that was their, part of their presentation was saying, we're trying to do this. We're trying to put every asset we have on the same platform, and people were impressed. And if they do it, I'd be impressed.
Yep.
Really quickly.
It's a headache.
Tell us about the pitfalls of that, because that sounds like a big headache.
It's if you're starting from zero, it's a lot easier because you spin up a new version, you do new languages and so on. But built into the technology, built into the rules around how the technology operates is how the market operates. Now, the problem is not every market operates the same way. Okay? So I would be very cautious about trying to make one size fits all. Okay, in this whole process, unless your model is absolutely vanilla, which is what the Matula model was. Right? It was very vanilla, and you could literally take one model and just change the language.
And we didn't care about being a market leader either.
No, you cared about the outcome, which was generating of leads. But when you're the market leader, because what happens is the technology then starts to get a life of itself, and the company then focuses inward on big technology programs, the projects, how long does it take to do it. Clearly, you can move to one accounting platform. Clearly, you can move to one HR system. All the back office stuff you can do, right? Because no one cares. But anything that touches a customer who pays or a consumer, okay, who's looking for something to buy or rent or whatever, you've got to think carefully about. And as your model goes from an advertising model to a transaction model, it becomes far more complex. Because with transaction models, you have to really understand how each individual market operates. And if you're in France, it's going to be different to how it's in Spain. It's going to be different to how it's in Belgium, okay, in as an example. And the challenge is you're always fighting against a local focused player, which is the other challenge. So the local focused player, the people who wake up in the morning, they speak the language, they've been doing it for 100 years, their own personal wealth is tied to making this success, and they've got this level of motivation that it's very hard to recreate in this whole process. It's only those who eat and breathe how a market operates in Italy or France or Germany are the ones that can really, day in, day out, understand it. But if you are going to go cross-border, think about it more as an investment vehicle. I'm going to invest. Is a VIF really an investment vehicle, right? Where I'm going to invest, I'm going to own these, they're going to run separately, and I'm going to look for opportunities slowly to extract value, okay, across HR. Because remember, at some point, the group might get broken up again. Someone comes along and says, I want to buy that asset, I want to buy Web, I want to buy whatever. How easy is it to then carve off, go, here you go, here's the outcome. Okay.
That's a good point.
Okay. And then the
Gents,
last point, which is
go on,
a future, just as a teaser for a future.
Yeah, another one to put on the spreadsheet for a future episode. Go on.
Right. We've got two things that we looked at doing at the REA Group when I was there. One, and we should talk about this in the future, was my meeting with Rupert Murdoch about buying Rightmove.
Yeah,
okay, that's a teaser.
This is an anecdote that I want to come out at some point because I heard it from you once, and it was absolutely top-notch anecdote. And
the second is how we tried to buy Realtor.com, wanted to buy Realtor.com back in 2008.
Okay, another story for another day and a good place to leave it. Harvey, Simon, thank you for talking to us. To me, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more of these anecdotes, a lot more of these war stories will come out over the coming weeks, and I'm sure the audience will enjoy hearing them. If you like what you heard today, make sure to give us a little thumbs up, give us a comment, give us a rating, or just email us with your feedback. We've had a few people do that already, and it's all useful. Gents, thank you, and until next time.
Okay. Thanks very much, guys. Ciao for now.